In this video, what we're going to do is go over the most common and useful shortcut keys that can make you work quicker and more efficiently in Cinema 4D. Now, some of these may seem a little bit basic and ones you might be already using, but hopefully there's some you haven't seen or used before. In addition, I'll also show you how to set up your own shortcut keys because there are a few things that I do think would be very important to set up shortcut keys for so that you can toggle between different options or tools quickly. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's get started with the shortcut keys. As I mentioned, some of the ones in the beginning are going to be pretty obvious, pretty common, things you might already be doing. If you're not though, these are going to be some of the most important keys to know. So starting with Shift C on your keyboard. If you do Shift C, that will open up your commander, which then allows you to type in any kind of tool, tag, find things from the asset browser, whatever you want. So just as a few examples, you can type in snap. You can see you'll get access to your snapping tools. We could do solo and we'll get access to our soloing tools. If you just typed in axis, you will get all of your axis tools or anything that matches the keywords you put in here. If you were to type in something like metal, notice how you will get models and eventually materials that match your description. You can come up here to the filter and decide, actually, the little arrow here, to choose kind of what you are including with it set to all, which is what's happening with your filter being set to all there. So auto, all, whatever you think is going to be best can help speed things up and help you get what you need quicker. Next up, we have our basic navigation commands. There are a few different ways you can navigate in Cinema 4D. This one, I think, is the most effective and efficient. And that's a big part of these shortcut keys, is trying to do things as efficiently and quickly as possible. That way you will save a bunch of time. So we can start by using the Alt or Option key in our left mouse button to orbit. All right, that's pretty straightforward. Alt or Option in the middle mouse button to pan, and Alt or Option in the right mouse button to zoom. Okay, I prefer this method over the 1, 2, 3 keys in the left mouse button, as well as the kind of cheats up here in the right-hand corner of our viewport. Next up are our basic move, rotate, and scale tools. I should also point out that if you are unsure of a shortcut key for a tool or option, if you hover over it and there is a shortcut key, it will tell you what that key is. So you can see the shortcut key for our move tool is E, rotate is R, scale is T. Once again, being able to just kind of toggle through those really quickly is going to save you a bunch of time, because anytime you want to do any of those commands, you don't have to stop, move your mouse all the way over to the left-hand side here and change. And especially if you have a large monitor or an ultra-wide monitor, that can save you a bunch of time. Okay, I do want to briefly point out that there aren't shortcut keys by default for the point, edge, polygon, and model modes. That is something I will go over at the end. Next up, if you want to toggle your active view, what you can do is just click in your middle mouse button, and that will take you back to your 4 views here. And then what you can do is click your middle mouse button to switch views. Now, this isn't necessarily the most efficient way of doing this, but it is one way, and one I do find kind of useful if I do want to go back to all 4 views here to take a look at my scene, reposition something. Along those same lines, you can switch between your different viewports using F1 through 4 on your keyboard. Now, if you're using your F keys for things like playing and pausing music or adjusting brightness or volume, you may need to do a little bit more work or use that function key in order to get it to work. But if you're not doing that, F1 will be your perspective view. F2 will be the top view. F3 will be the right view. F4 will be the front view. In this case, it's the back view. If I toggle back here to my quad view, really what the F keys do is toggle between these 4 different windows or viewports. And so if you change them, like I changed this one to the back view, that is what F4 will load. So for instance, once again, if I hit F4 here, it goes to the back. If I switch this back to, say, front, now when I hit F4, we can see it does in fact use the front view. So what those F keys are doing are not tied to a specific view, but a specific window in this 4-view layout. So that's what we have there. Now, another fairly obvious shortcut key is undo. So if you do something you don't like, you can hit Control or Command Z to undo. Once again, saving you from going all the way up here and undoing there manually. Another option is camera undo. So if you're looking through a camera and you accidentally move it, okay, you're not using something like a protection tag on it, you can use Control Shift Z in order to undo that camera move. And so if you've been, moving around a camera for a while, you've forgotten, that you were looking through a particular camera, Control Shift Z, if you keep hitting it, should get you back to that view. It is tied to the number of undos you have, I believe. So it's not infinite, but as long as it isn't too long ago, you should be okay. And for whatever it's worth, if you don't want to move a camera or you want to stop a camera from being able to move, you can add a protection tag to it. So next up, I want to talk about how you can play an animation. Okay, if you're coming from After Effects, you might think spacebar would be the shortcut key for that, but it is not. In fact, if you were in the default layout here, it's actually F8 is what you would use to play an animation. Okay, there is a little bit of a gotcha for that, or a way around that, as we'll see here very soon. And to show that, let's open up our timeline, which you can do by hitting Shift F3. So Shift F3 will open your timeline or close it, essentially a toggle. Okay, and now with your mouse cursor inside of the timeline, when you hit spacebar, it will play it. And I like to show this because it shows that shortcut keys are contextual, meaning it matters where your mouse is. So shortcut keys might have one effect if your mouse is in the perspective view. It might have a separate effect if it's in the object manager, or a different effect if it's in the timeline. And so the good thing about that is it means we can use even more shortcut keys, and a single shortcut key is not necessarily tied to every single part of Cinema 4D. On the other hand, it can be confusing because it means we have to be careful with where our mouse is. A couple of other useful keys here. We do have F and G for going to the next frame or going to the previous frame. And there are a few versions of this if you want to use the other options you have here. So for instance, Alt G would go to next key, okay, and Shift G will go to the very end. And the same thing would work for F. Alt F will go to the next previous key, whereas Shift F will go and move our timeline, or our time slider, I should say, to the very beginning of our animation. So that can make it a little bit easier to remember because the shortcut keys are very similar. Go to next frame is G, go to next key is Control G or Command G, and then Shift G will take you to the very end. Now, I don't necessarily recommend using these options for keyframing something, but if you want to use record active objects or auto key, you can see their shortcut keys here. F9 is what you would use for record active objects, and you can see it keyframed everything, which is one of the reasons why I don't like it. And if you want to use auto key or toggle that on, it is Control F9. And notice how that didn't keyframe anything because we would need to start moving things and having it take advantage of auto key that way. Another important shortcut key for our timeline is that you can toggle between the dope sheet mode and F-curve mode using tab. All right, once again, make sure your mouse cursor is in the timeline in order for that to work. But you can see I'm toggling back and forth there. And if I was to select an object, we can now see the curves for that object. And this brings me to my next set of shortcut keys, which can be used in your timeline or your perspective view, or also in your object manager. And that is the H and the S key. H will frame all. So in this case, it's framing all of the keyframes of this object. If it was If my cursor was in my perspective view, you can see it's framing all of my objects, and it would do the same in our object manager. I don't find it too useful here. What you can also do is have it frame selected using the S key. So if I select a single keyframe and hit S, it's zooming in on that keyframe. If I have a single object selected and hit S, it's going to zoom in and frame the selected object. This will also work with our sub objects for our polygons. All right, so points, edges, polygons as well. I also really like this for when we're working in our object manager. So let's say, you have something selected and you don't know where it is in your object manager because you were grabbing it here in your perspective view. Make sure your cursor is in the object manager, hit S, and it will load it in. This is extremely useful if you have a very complicated CAD file with many thousands of objects and you're trying to optimize it, group things together, and whatnot. Using that S key can make it much easier to find those elements, group them, and then do whatever else it is you need to do. Moving on to some of our selection tools. These, I think, are some of the most awkward shortcut keys. All right. Once again, they're all the way on the left-hand side here. And so if I'm working in the middle of my screen, I don't want to have to stop what I'm doing and switch. And you'll also notice there are quite a few selection tools here. Brush selection and rectangular are the ones I use the most. And their shortcut keys are 9 and 0. So 9 is for brush selection. If you hit 0, you will see it will switch to rectangular selection. So between knowing 9 and 0 and knowing your move, rotate, and scale shortcut keys, you're really not going to have to come over to the left-hand side of Cinema 4D anymore. And once again, that should save you a whole bunch of time. Moving on to my modeling shortcuts, I'm going to toggle off my timeline. Once again, Shift F3. And then what I'm going to do is zoom in here. The good news is there's kind of like one main shortcut key for modeling, and that is M. When you hit M, you'll see a list of a whole bunch of different modeling tools you can then use a separate shortcut key for in order to use. And now we're not going to go through all of these, but I do plan to show some of the most common ones. So I'm going to start by just making a selection of polygons here. I'm going to hit M for modeling and then T for extrude. So that'll allow me to use my extrude tool. We can see how that's working. I could do MW for inset, right? Another very common modeling tool. I'm going to Control or Command Z to undo that. From there, ML for loop or path cut. Very easy way to add in additional edges. MK will then allow me to do line cut. Now keep in mind, a lot of these tools do work in different modes. I'm going to hit spacebar to end that tool. But a lot of these tools will work in polygon mode as well as edge mode and then point mode. Okay, from there we have weld. So I could go into point mode, select a couple of points, and that's going to be MW. You can see I can now weld 2 points together, or at least I should be able to, assuming, no, 2 points, M. Oh, that's because W isn't weld. Q is, my mistake. There we go. All right, Q was inset. Although it did look like actually some of these changed a little bit. Actually, I take that back. Inset was the same. So moving on, we also have dissolve. So let's say you have an edge loop selected, which actually haven't talked about how to select an edge loop yet. But let's say you have an edge selected. We'll just start with that. And you want to get rid of it. You can dissolve it. That will be MN, and it will delete that edge or edge loop for you. Okay, after that we have close polygon hole. So that's going to be MD, and that will close our polygon hole. Now, before I move on to our selection shortcuts, there is one shortcut key I use quite a bit that I actually don't know what it's referred to as. So if anybody does know what this is, please let me know. I couldn't find it in the command manager, but if you hit V on your keyboard, it kind of pulls up a multi-menu. And so I use this very often to access my select menu, some of my snap settings, view options, camera, and even recent tools. And what's nice about this is, once again, it puts a lot of different things very close to my mouse cursor, so I'm not having to move it in many different places. So, I honestly use this more than a lot of the selection shortcut keys which we're going to get into very shortly. They have a similar kind of singular menu that you can access them. But I wanted to talk about that V key because I find it so useful and use it all the time for all the different options I can access there. Okay, so for our main selection shortcut key, that's going to be U. That will bring up a list of all the different shortcuts we can use. Most of these are related to selections, though not all of them. That first one, align normals, not really a selection tool. Some of the others as well, subdivide, split, as you'll see, aren't quite related to that. Still some useful ones in here. And so we're going to go through the most common ones. I do want to point out, though, if you do move your mouse, it does go away. Be very careful about that. So I'm going to start with U and then L, which is going to be loop selection, which makes it very easy to select a loop of edges, even polygons, and then delete them or dissolve them, which once again is MN to dissolve. Similar to loop, we also have ring, so that's going to be UB. All right, although I think I hit the wrong key, so let's try that again. UB. Ended up in bridge mode, I think, that first time. You can see now how, rather than just kind of the continuous loop, I'm getting these rings, and we could do the same thing. We could dissolve these or whatever it is we need to do with them. Very easy to select them. Another very interesting shortcut key, if I say have a polygon selected here, is going to be grow selection and shrink selection. So that will be UY to grow, and you can hopefully see how it selected the next polygons next to it. Turning off materials didn't make that any easier to see. Okay, you can also shrink a selection by doing UK. And so that can be very useful, once again, for trying to make very specific selections. Another useful shortcut key that you won't even see really listed here is select all, right? Doesn't mention a shortcut key there, but you can hit Control or Command A and that will work. That is a contextual shortcut key, so you do need to make sure your mouse cursor is in the perspective view or viewport and not in your object manager, where if you hit Control A, it will select all of those objects. Also, last shortcut key I want to mention from that selection menu U is invert. And so that is going to be UI. So if you select, a couple of polygons and you want to invert that, UI, it should select the invert. Now, for whatever reason, I need to make sure I deselect those elements there. So let's try that one more time with these objects selected. There we go. Select a couple of polygons and UI. Now that worked. It's a little bit hard to see because of the shading on this, but I can see that the edge there kind of isn't selected, so it is working. One thing with those shortcut keys with M, with U, if you don't see the first menu pop up, right, like U, don't see that list, then you know that tool or the next shortcut key you're going to use is not going to work. All right, so we're going to be moving on here just to some other shortcut keys I find useful, starting with L. L on your keyboard, make sure I have the right object selected, will toggle on axis modification, which means I can now come in and move the object axis of an editable object or a generator, really anything that isn't a primitive. You can then either use that again or use L to toggle off axis modification. You can toggle on snap using Shift S. So that will toggle on your snap settings here. And now if I move something, you can see it's trying to snap to points or whatever else I have enabled in my snap settings. Along those same lines, I'm going to toggle snap off by using Shift S. You can move things, rotate things, or scale things in very specific values or quantize them if you hold down shift. And so this is most common in rotating something. So if you're rotating an object, and you can see now how it's rotating very smoothly. If you hold shift, you'll see that it snaps to 10-degree increments, and this is adjustable in your snap or quantize settings. And the same is true for move. If once you start moving something, you hold shift, you can see now it is moving in 10 centimeter increments. Same thing for scale. You can see it's going to scale in 10% increments. So that's a way to quantize your movements, your rotations and scales by using shift. And it's similar to snap, which is why I saved it for now. Next up, some render setting shortcuts. So if you want to render your viewport, you can hit Control R. Okay, now this scene is not using Redshift. It's just an example scene from the asset browser here. Still looks pretty nice. So Control R is just going to render that there. If you want to render to your picture view, that is Shift R. And you can see in this case, it's set up to render a sequence. I don't want to do that, but that would render to our picture viewer. If you would like to pull up your render settings in order to adjust them, that's going to be Controller Command B. And so now I have access to my render settings and can make any changes or adjustments I need to here. To access some of our other managers and windows, you can open your material manager by using Shift F2, and that'll pop open the material manager here. Keep in mind with these managers, coordinate manager, which we'll talk about next, these are toggles. So you can use it once to open that manager, use it again to close that manager. So for our coordinate manager, it's Shift F7. I don't use this all that frequently, but when I do, it's nice to be able to just toggle it open and close there. And then the next couple shortcut keys I want to talk about are related to geometry. In fact, I may just start a new scene for this. So if you have an object and you want to create a new object as a parent, say put this cube and make it a child of a subdivision surface. So make the subdivision surface a parent here. When you hold down Alt or Option and create that object, it will place whatever object you had selected as a child inside of that. If instead you wanted to make the next object you create a child of whatever you have selected, then what you can do is hold down Shift. So if you wanted to create a deformer and make it a child of this cube, if you hold down Shift, it will make that object a child of that object. Something else I should mention, and I can switch back to this file to show you that, is if you have any property, whether it's something in the coordinate tab, whether it's a field, a deformer, what you can do is if you right click on any one of these values, it will set it back to the default. So whether that's a size, whether it's strength, whether it's coordinates, say something here, it will reset it back to its default value. Sometimes that 0 is, as is the case with position, rotation, and scale, depending on the object though, size may default to something different if you right click on it. For instance, if you were in a plane, you can see it has a default value of 100 centimeters on the y-axis in this plane effector. If you right click on it, that's what it's going to reset to, whatever that default initial value is when the object is created. Lastly, what I want to talk about is how we can create our own shortcut keys for things like point mode, edge mode, polygon mode, perhaps even our different modes here, model, object, and animation, because I do think it really is a shame that these don't come with shortcut keys by default. The way you would do that would be to open up the command manager here, and this will show you a list of every single command, option, tool in Cinema 4D. You can also filter it by shortcut filter. So for instance, we're going to use the 1 key, and we can see that that is assigned to say move a camera, though there are some other options for that. Ultimately though, because I don't use those options for navigating, I don't use the 1, 2, 3 keys with my left mouse button, I'm not concerned about overriding that. So what we can do is say type in points, And what I'm going to do is look for an icon that matches our icon there. That's called points. To assign a shortcut key, just put that in there. I'm going to want to use 1. If I wanted to restrict this to a specific window or part of my user interface, this is how you can do it. You can see a list of all the different options here. It will be cut off on the recording, but you will see viewport towards the bottom of that list. So could use with this, I could hit assign. You can see it saying, do you want to overwrite it and remove the previous shortcut key? I would say yes. I would then do the same thing for edges. Find that. Use the shortcut key 2 and, oops, not backspace 2. Oh no. So let's just clear that out and then hit assign. It's going to say, do you want to overwrite and remove for scale camera? Yes. And then do the same thing for polygons. Make sure you find the same icon. Shortcut key 3 is what I would recommend. Click assign. Absolutely. Do I want to change it? And from there, we've done the first 3. Now, where it gets a little bit more complicated is if you wanted to set up a toggle so that you could go between model, object, and animation mode. At the very least, I would just kind of set up shortcut keys there. I don't know what the shortcut key is for 4. So there isn't one for 4. There isn't one for 5. And I don't know about 6. So those would be what I would assign for those so that you could very easily switch between those. The whole idea with shortcut keys is to save you time from moving your mouse too far away from where you're working. And so if you can learn the shortcut keys for move, rotate, scale, your selection tools here, as well as set up shortcut keys and use them for your different modes here, you are going to be saving a bunch of time because your mouse can stay in the middle of your viewport and not move every time you need to do something like that. And that time will add up. All right. You know, imagine the number of times you probably go over here to switch tools if you didn't use shortcut keys, change selections without using shortcut keys, or even change modes without shortcut keys. And that time adds up over the long run in days, weeks, and months. That will do it for this video. If there's anything else you would like to see, please leave me a comment down below. And if you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate it if you could like it and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, take care.